Okay, what I thought was going to be a simple update video on the lore of Flesh and Blood, thanks to this brand new Omens in the Sky article, turned into something that is far more reaching than I expected. So first things first, if you did not notice, if you did not see, LSS released this article called Omens in the Sky, and it serves as sort of like a summary / story in and of itself of what's going on leading up to and through the Omens of the Third Age set. I will sort of give you a synopsis of this synopsis, if you will, if you're interested, but then we need to talk about what's happening with the actual lore of Flesh and Blood, not just like in the storyline, but from a meta perspective, because LSS is actually going in and adding things to pages that I don't think anyone has noticed. I, for one, just discovered some of these things, and I was so flabbergasted that I literally got the old lore book out just to see if it was in the lore book and I missed it, or if it was newly added. And yes, they are adding lore to different pages to sort of flesh out some of these new locations that we're being introduced to. So first things first, Enyon is the northern region of Aria, and it is where Volthaven and sort of the lightning heroes hail from. Volthaven is in Enyon, and the overarching storyline of Enyon is that everything is sort of unstable, and it's getting more unstable. And over in Aria in general, the Aether in the form of the flow and the shale, which are these unstable forces that can transform the overarching like landscape, are getting worse. And there used to be a veil that separated Aria from everything else, and now that veil is fading. So people can come in and out more frequently rather than sort of teleporting in as they would. Again, this goes kind of deep into the weeds. Anyway, this is what Aria is, and Enyon's in the north part of this, and that's where these first omens begin to appear. An ominous sigil appears in the sky, a tear in reality like a hungering maw. And essentially these things show up, and when they show up, they begin to like corrupt everything, kind of like what the flow is doing to Aria, where it changes things, but here it's always a shadow. It's always a dark corruption, a force that is perverting the way a natural thing should be. And everything that is being touched by this is becoming ravenous. Keep that in mind. Ravenous, hungry, unceasing hunger is a good way to describe it, because that will come back to play now that some new details have been added to the lore of Flesh and Blood that changes, like, I don't know, the past 3 years of speculation for those that haven't seen it. So this is going on first in Enyon, and while whole towns are being, like cast into bedlam, the appearance of these omens are essentially affecting the flow and kind of buffing it up, if you will, adding to, these lightning heroes to new potency, essentially. So explaining how the lightning flow talent, no, that's not even the best way to say it, the lightning flow token essentially is going to change in-game play for lightning heroes. Kind of explains how this set is functioning. But essentially, from a lore perspective, these heroes are now using the lightning flow embodiments, or the being imbued with this newfound power, to try and close these little rifts that are popping up. And when, of course, the wizards and wayfarers go and do this, specifically Ailio and Aurora, when they fly up to one of the omens, a demonic force basically just destroys Ailio, kind of like what we saw in the trailer. And when he's destroyed, Aurora overcharges Starfall until the blade shatters, releasing the weapon's elemental energies, basically remaking him thanks to the sacrifice of the similar power. The nature that is inherent within the Starfall is the same nature that is Ailio, and so the sacrifice of the sword can represent a resurrection, if you will, of Ailio, and that's exactly what's going to happen. It doesn't happen immediately. In fact, Ailio goes and sort of like basically gets left back to reform in Volthaven. While that is happening, he gets a message from Zyggy Starlight, and we get our first confirmation that what I expected, or what I theorized, is correct. Zyggy is an Aether scribe, And Zyggy's not the only Aether Scribe, because there are multiple Aether Scribes, and they are all stranded in the Nebulus Rift. And if you were paying attention to some of the spoilers, at the end spoiler card, whenever it's shown, sometimes it just says, you know, the set can be found at local game stores at this release date, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes we get lore blurbs, and there is one card that got a lore blurb where Ziggy Starlight is essentially explaining that when the ancients sacrificed themselves to stop the spread of the old ones back in the Third Age. In doing so, they tore the reality of Wraith into 3 parts, and it broke essentially this one wider world into 3. You had the you had Wraith, the like continent, if you will, or the reality of Wraith, and then you had its mirror, which was Irathiel, which, based on what they're saying, presumably was still like part or a region of Wraith, and then they were broken apart, or maybe they were like parallel worlds and now they are fully separated. And then the third region, if you will, or reality, is the Nebulus Rift that sort of connects the two, and that's where the Aether Scribes have been trapped in the Nebulus Rift, in a specific place, the Auric Keep. Now, before this set, this was not a place that existed. The Auric Keep was not really talked about, and here they say the Aether Scribes inhabit the Auric Keep, a fragment of old Valahai. And if you're like, I recognize that world, yeah, we had Grandeur of Valahai, and Valahai was talked about very, very briefly, like just mentioned by name in other articles, but it was never fleshed out until recently. And by recently, I mean as recently as maybe yesterday when this got posted. And we'll look at that here in a moment, because they put it in well, I guess it's a very good place to put it, but the last place you would be going to look at. So we'll talk about what that looks like now. But Valahai, that can be reconnected to Wraith by a powerful artifact known as the Voltaris Gem. And we can assume that the Voltaris, or Voltaris, whatever you want to pronounce it, the Voltaris Gem is going to be the fabled of this set, because then Aurora has to go on a quest to get the Voltaris Gem, and then put that Voltaris Gem into a specific location to reconnect the Auric Keep to the world of Wraith, and specifically to Inyan, so that the Aether Scribes can come back and help. So they tell Ailio the secret where it's secured. It is in a place called Shieldverk, which I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce that, but just go with me. Now, this is another place that has never existed until this exact moment, and I looked it up just curious, and it does turn out this was also put into a place. This is an ancient gatehouse where the gem can be used. Again, we're still in the Nebulous Rift, we can assume. Ziggy promises that once their exile is over, they can help close the Omen and spread into the spread of corruption before it engulfs Inyan. So Aurora uses Ziggy's instruction to go and find the island where this vault is hidden, and then she discovers that it is actually on a what is essentially an island that has now turned into a comet. So this actually depicts the vault location, this island that is plummeting towards Inyan to basically just destroy, or Volthaven, to basically just destroy that entire area. So she races up to the island. She finds the little gateway that's going to basically allow her to access everything. She uses the power of the Voltaris Gem to forge a new blade on the hilt of Starfall, and she names that blade Scorpio. At that point, we then see this picture take place, because it says, she calls down a tempest, basically explodes the comet, so the comet is no longer an issue. I mean, it's like you introduce it, and then you're like, you're done, we're all good. And then she flies free, she returns to Volthaven, meets the new Ailio that we all know and come to affectionately refer to as Brocilio, because he's swole. And then they go to Shieldverk, which this is. They put the Voltaris Gem, or Voltaris Gem, into the Astral Bridge. They power the Astral Bridge up, and now everyone essentially can access the Nebulous Rift, and they can go to Shieldverk. They do this whole thing, and the Auric Keep is now accessible. So Ziggy greets them. They follow the Aether Scribe across the Astral Bridge to the Auric Keep, where they learn from surviving Aether Scribes, meaning there are more Aether Scribes, that the sigil is seeping into Wraith from its sister world, Irathiel, home of the Aesir's since the Third Age. Now, this is where things start to get a little weird, and it was sort of the prompting of this that we're going to dive into, because Irathiel is the home of the Aesir's since the Third Age, and we know up to this point we thought the Aesir's are like just the bad guys. They are the old ones. They're synonymous. Like they're two names for the same referent. Is that how you would say that? Two reference for the same thing? Maybe it's that way. So we thought they were like just synonymous, but I don't think they are anymore. And now I have to call into question everything that we've known up to this point. So they do this and they're like, hooray, we've done it. And they go to the Omen in the sky and they use their power, their newfound power, along with Ziggy Starlight to actually close the Omen itself. And they're like, yay, hooray, we've done it. But then it turns out that that was not the only omen, and that was not the only thing, because omens begin to appear everywhere. They mention above the wild jungles of the Savage Land, over the red earth of Volcor, over the fog-veiled valleys of Mysteria, over the broken hills of the Northern Realms, which is an interesting little touch because we haven't really explored the Northern Realms outside of a couple of heroes' backstories. And then over the skyscrapers of Metrix, and then over the besieged city of Solana, which is where we can assume we will be going in the next set, going forward. We realize that the gravity of this moment, that the Wraith is about to change forever. But Wraith didn't just change forever here, because now we have this down here. This takes us to the updates made to the Aria page. So this is the page in the World of Wraith section. It's kind of cut off. This is the page for Aria. And this has been, as is, stock standard ever since they released the, release is not the correct word. Ever since they wrote it all down for this book right here, which is the lore book, the Flesh and Blood lore book, the thing that they should definitely make more of, but they're clearly not putting their energy towards, and I wish they would put some amount of energy towards it, because this is fantastic. It's a fantastic book. If they had like a paper-bound copy, people could pick it up and read the lore. Dude, I'm serious. The lore for this game is fantastic and is so undervalued, I think is the right way to put it. It's so, I'm just going to say undervalued. We're just going to leave it at that. It is so good that you could lean into this so heavily and continue to like write out stories for this, because there's a lot of the world to explore. But what's most interesting is that a portion of this world that you can explore very down way at the bottom has now been expanded upon. So this changes everything about what we thought about the lore up to this point, and you can think of it maybe in one like negative light of like, well, this sort of changes some things and it's kind of out of the blue, or you can think about it as the story is continuing to unfold in front of us in real time as we're learning more pieces and as the world continues to get built out. But essentially, the old ones came to Wraith. How? No one knows. But they weren't there inherently, and that's something that we kind of all thought they were, and because that's primarily because we assumed the old ones were the Aesir. And the interesting thing is the Aesir being those that lived in Irathiel since the Third Age. The Aesir aren't necessarily the same as the old ones, in that we can see that down here. The old ones feasted on everything that Wraith had to offer, even the Aesirs themselves. So all of a sudden, everyone, myself included, from the beginning of essentially like the lore, we all thought the Aesirs were inherently these bad things, and that there was sort of this duality. There's like maybe mankind, or creatures themselves were inherently neutral, or maybe even like the good guys of the story, and they were all in some way, shape, or form being manipulated by the Aesir. I thought that's where the story was going, but that's not necessarily the case. We see that the Aesirs early on in like the very beginning of the storyline for like Solana, they almost appear in some way, shape, or form to be nefarious. Like Sol is this being of light, and yet at the same time, there's something seriously wrong with the Aesir of light that these demonastery people discovered and then were kicked out for. We think, okay, so there's this underlying plot, but this changes all of that. This puts the antagonists squarely as like this alien entity. Now, I don't mean alien like extraterrestrial. I mean alien as in like unknown, faraway entities that have come somehow to Wraith and begin feasting on everything, including what is essentially the spirits or gods of Wraith themselves. And they are fought against by everyone, including the elementals that you see here. And the ancients, the elementals, maybe the ancients are the Aesir, are falling to the invaders. And what they're doing is they're essentially creating these raveneers, ravenous. They're ravenous in hunger. They absorb the continent's matter and aether and disgorged it in the monstrous waves of enemies that crash against Valahai. They're essentially consuming without the ability to stop. They're consuming the world and all of these ancients and elementals and, people, menfolk. You can see all of these communities are rallying to stop it. And it turns out they all fall back to Valahai, which is where the human tribes and the dwarven clans, they flee northeast of the Old Ones in the wake of the Old Ones' onslaught. And they fall back to this last bastion where the Olin are and where all of this battle is going on to try and hold back the onslaught, to stem the tide, if you will. And of course, we do know that it is through the sacrifice of Davnir Yvor and Galcia that the actual onslaught is stopped. Not because they just win, but now we know because they literally split reality into 3 parts and somehow were able, through that, to quiet the Old Ones. And again, if you're thinking that, the Old Ones are basically cast into Arathiel like I was originally, doesn't seem to be the case. But at the same time, back in the first portion of the article, the Aesir were said to be sleeping in Arathiel or residing in Arathiel. So we have this strange, perhaps a contradiction, or maybe there's more to flesh out here, where sometimes it feels like those names are synonymous, Old Ones and Aesir, and sometimes, in this case, far more interestingly, I will put, the Old Ones and the Aesir are not the same, unless they're saying they're feasting on themselves, which I guess is sort of like an Ouroboros thing. I don't know. But either way, what we're getting is this picture that is far more nuanced than what we thought, and it could make it far more interesting when we see the perhaps fruition of all of this at the outset of the next set, which we can all assume is Monarch 3 and the finishing story of that trilogy of the War of the Monarchs, the battle between the Demonastery and Solana, light and darkness, fighting against each other, and maybe it all comes to a head when we realize that the true fight was against the Old Ones all along. And this, by the way, continues. You can read more about the Aether Scribes as well, and then there's the passage about Shieldverk. So all of this has now been added to this page, and this is pretty monumental if you care about the lore, because it means that there's far more space than what was essentially crafted in this book, far more space for us to explore and for us to learn about the storyline itself. Okay, also, by the way, I just really appreciate Wraithen folk. I think that is the coolest name for a people group. Anyone that lives in Wraith is a Wraithen folk. They are all referred to as Wraithen folk. So this is what has been laid down in what is essentially, at first glance, an innocuous storyline. Now we get far more padding out. Here's, by the way, the Nebulus Rift. Also, this is a really cool little quote that was on another spoiler. If Arathiel and Wraith are lakes of Aether, then the Nebulous Rift is a churning river between. And you can kind of, it'll spell out some of this in this article as well. It talks about the Astral Bridge and Auric Keep. But if you're interested in the lore, there's far more to delve into now, and it's definitely more nuanced than I think we all thought, myself included. If you like this sort of recap, let me know that down in a comment below. Of course, make the number go to the other number, support the channel like that. We like seeing numbers go up. As always, everybody, thanks for watching.